Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Win. So I'm Deb Martin. I'm a professor of geography here at Clark. Many of you already know that. I'm here to introduce the Feminist Geography and the GSG panel. Thank you all for being here. I think we were very well set up from Mona's talk for what our panelists will say, so I'm excited to continue the conversation. What I'm going to do is introduce the panelists all at once. I will introduce everyone, and then Susan will start with comments and we'll go down the row. So I'm going to introduce them in the row in which they're sitting, and then they'll speak in that order. So Susan Hanson, right next to me here, past president of the Association of American Geographers and served as director of the GSG more than once. She retired from Clark officially in 2007, but was still around after that with PhD students finishing. After being a professor here for about 25 years, I think. I didn't actually do the math. She is an urban, Susan can correct me. She's an urban geographer with interests in gender and economy, transportation, local labor markets, and sustainability. Her research has examined the relationship between the urban built environment and people's everyday mobility within cities. Within this context, questions of access to opportunity and how gender affects access have been paramount. Her current activities include serving as division chair of the Transportation Research Board, which is one of the 6 divisions of the NRC of the National Academies, as a member of the Council of the National Academy of Sciences, and as a member of the advisory boards of the NRC's Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education and the NRC's Gulf Research Program. Melissa Gilbert. Whoops, you switched around.
I was compelled
They
to
tricked me. Okay, hang on. Okay, Joni Seager is professor of global studies at Bentley College, keeping me on my toes here. She graduated in 1988 with her Clark Geography Ph.D. Joni's held teaching positions at the University of Vermont as Dean of Environmental Studies at York University in Toronto, and now holds the Arts and Sciences Distinguished Professorship at Bentley University. Joni has worked with several UN initiatives to bring feminist analyses into a range of environmental global policy frameworks, including in climate change and water policies. Joni is now working with the World Wildlife Foundation and several multilateral agencies to bring a gender lens into their work to curb global illegal wildlife trafficking. See who's next. Okay. Ibipo Johnston-Anumonwo has a PhD in geography from Clark in 1987, and I think Susan and Ibipo told me that she was Susan's first PhD student here at Clark. Ibipo is a professor of geography at SUNY Cortland. She has a bachelor's and master's degrees of education from University of Ibadan in Nigeria and Harvard, respectively. In 2010, she was a recipient of SUNY Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Scholarship and received the 2016 AAG Award for Distinguished Teaching Honors. She examines issues of women's labor force participation and work commutes. She's also written more recently about mentoring in academia. She's co-editor of Global Perspectives on Gender and Space, and she serves on the editorial boards of African Geographical Review and the Journal of Transnational Women's and Gender Studies, and also on the AP Human Geography Test Development Committee. All right, now we're at Melissa. Melissa Gilbert is professor and department chair of Geography and Urban Studies and director of the Center for Sustainable Communities at Temple University, where she's been since 1996. Melissa received her PhD in 1994 and master's in 1991 from the GSG here at Clark. Her research expertise includes urban geography, intersectional feminist theory and anti-racist geographies, and participatory action research. She has used these theoretical and methodological frameworks to understand poverty and social networks, the societal dimensions of information and communication technologies, infrastructure and sustainability, and just socio-ecological transitions. Melissa is currently working on 2 projects with other Clarkies. First on well-being, health, and pollution in Colombia, and second on public schools as critical infrastructure during disasters, focused on Philadelphia. So, and last but not least is Winifred Curran, who is a professor of geography at DePaul University in Chicago. She earned her Ph.D. from Clark in 2004. Her research has focused on understanding the effects of gentrification on the urban landscape, looking at labor, industrial retention, policing, environmental gentrification, and gendering of urban policy. She is the author of Gender and Gentrification and co-editor with Trina Hamilton of Just Green Enough, Urban Development and Environmental Gentrification. So our panel's focus is feminist geography at Clark and Clark's influence on feminist geography. I want to add that I also asked the panelists to consider framing their comments around the question of feminist theory at Clark when you were here, Clark's influences on their research trajectories, more about their own research if they wish, climate and / the engagements with feminist theory in their career, that is the climate for it, at different institutions and departments as is relevant, and their perspectives on the state of feminist theory and geography today compared to when they were at Clark. So I don't know how much of that they will each individually cover, but just to give you a little context of what they were posed as far as framing their comments for today. So I will turn it over starting with Susan and we'll go down the road.
And you forgot to say we have to do it in 8 minutes. Okay. For me, it's 8 minutes, 2 sections. Section 1 is going to be a few nasty stories about my early life as an academic and why I thought I'd died and gone to heaven when I got to Clark. Section 2 is going to be the very early days of feminist geography at Clark, in mostly the kind of stuff we all do. So, stories. Ooh, where to start? All right, I started at grad school in Northwestern, which, according to Mona's table, had 4 women who got their doctors from Northwestern in geography before 1969. I went there in 1967. My first meeting with a faculty member, my assigned advisor, we sit down, he's the department chair. The first thing he says to me is, "Why do you want a PhD? You're already married and you already have a baby." Why a PhD? Okay, I think I said something feeble like, I really like to learn. Let's see. Second story. So Perry and I go to Sweden to do our field work. Because we have 2 kids by then, we got to get jobs when we go back and then finish our dissertations while working. So we applied for jobs from Sweden. Every single human geography job on the market at the time. There was no jobs in geography, it was just word of mouth. But we sent separate letters to the same places. He got answers from every single place. He even got some job interviews and he ended up getting a job. I did not get one single return letter acknowledging that I had applied for a job. Okay. Which other stories? Oh, okay. I think this is the last one. I did get a job at the same place where Perry got a job. I won't go into how that happened. Okay, so I go to my first faculty meeting. It's half-time in geography and half-time in sociology. And so I am the very first woman ever to be in the geography department at the University of Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo, 1971. So we go to first faculty meeting and the chair says, "Oh, Susan's here. Okay, Susan, you'll be taking the minutes for the meeting." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, you're the junior hire." I said, "Okay." So I take the minutes every year, faculty meeting, blah, blah, blah. Next year, first faculty meeting of the year, "Susan, you'll be taking the minutes for the meeting." I said, "Why?" "Well, because you've been doing it." And I said, "But I'm not the junior hire. We have Jack now. So Jack will be taking the minutes." And Jack did take the minutes. Anyway, you get the picture. It was enough to make anyone a feminist. So So when I got to Clark, and Mona did such a fabulous job of describing why I would have felt like I died and gone to heaven. Because it was the first place I had been where as a geographer and a mere woman, I felt where I wasn't being marginalized. The first place I had been. I had had 0 role models. Well, actually, at Middlebury when I did undergrad, there was not a single, I did not have a single female professor my entire undergraduate. And in graduate school, I had one, Janet Abulagad, who was a sociologist, an urban sociologist, and she was fantastic. And I took a seminar with her I was the only woman in my class, obviously, at Northwestern. There was one woman ahead of me, in the class ahead of me, Sophie Bowlby, some of you know her, she's a well-known feminist geographer. So we took that class together and we were just glommed onto Janet Abulagad's every move. I mean, how do you do this as a woman? I think men don't understand what it's like not to have any role models. So I got here and there were lots of role models. There were women in positions of power. Cynthia was here being a cheerleader for all the women on campus. It was just a whole different atmosphere. So that leads me to the early days of feminist geography, and I'm going to be talking mostly about economic geography, very broadly construed, here at Clark. So first of all, when I got here, Mona and Joni and Cindy Katz were all feminists, and I would say they were kind of surreptitiously writing dissertations that were surreptitiously feminist, because it wasn't blatantly feminist. You couldn't really announce that you were going to do a dissertation on a feminist topic. But anyway, they were feminists and they were doing dissertations on topics that no non-feminist would ever touch. So then I started doing, I gave my job talk on a gender topic, and I survived that, and then started doing research that was more blatantly feminist. So, for example, by openly recognizing the importance of differences and connectivities, and not just gender differences, but all kinds of difference and connectivities. And then that's one part of it. And then secondly, very consciously picking apart and questioning all kinds of accepted concepts, like what is an economic geographer, for example. And so whether doing this in cities, and I'm talking now not just about my own work, but others, like Diane, who's here today, whether in cities where, for example, Jerry Pratt and I, and with, very importantly, lots of graduate students, did a big study in Worcester, looking at gendered labor markets, and where we really basically upended the prevailing notion that a local labor market encompassed an entire metro area. That was the prevailing notion at the time, and we kind of did away with that. We talked about and documented the extent of women's caring labor and the labor market impacts on caring. Women's access to jobs, employer location decisions, and the way in which taking gender differences and other differences into account, that how does that affect employers' location decisions, where they put their factories and their offices. And also at that time, in the mid to late 80s, students, a lot of graduate students started working with Joni and Diane Rocheleau and with Billy to explore the role of gendered work in agriculture, as in smallholder farms in Mexico, for example, or urban agriculture in southern Africa, and showing how gender affects what crops are grown where, and the particular mix of domesticated plants and animals. All these things were being worked on mostly by our grad students. And later, looking at pastoral economies in Kenya and Mongolia. So you can see that it branched out from Worcester. So even in these early days of feminist geography at Clark, we were building on the tradition, the established tradition here in the GSG, of focusing studies locally within the city of Worcester, or the metro region of Worcester, and internationally. One of the first things I learned when I came to Clark was, Clark geography is better known anywhere else besides the US. Anywhere you go in the world, people will know about Clark geography. But if you go down to DC, maybe. And so I just want to end by saying, I think that is a tradition I'm sure is still carried on in feminist geography here at Clark, and basically all kinds of geography here at Clark. We range from the local to the global, and that is a huge strength that we have. And especially, it becomes a strength in the mezzanine. Is the mezzanine still where the grad students hang out? Okay. The mezzanine, that's where it all happens, because that's where you all speak to each other, you all talk to each other, you all interact, and you share your knowledge and your diverse viewpoints. And so what somebody's doing in Mongolia actually connects with what someone is doing at Clark. In Worcester. So it all happens in the mezzanine, and without the graduate students, I think none of this would happen. So let's hear it for the grad students.
Thank you, Susan. I'm putting on my stopwatch here. Okay, oh my God, I'm already a second into it. So, first of all, I have to say, I truly regret, like for myself, and I don't mean to be rude to anyone else, but right when this panel ends at 4, I need to blast out of here, because I have a flight out of Logan in too short a time after that. So, I'm really sorry I won't be able to stay and schmooze and talk to you all, but that's my loss. So anyway, so I apologize if you see me dashing out of here at 4. So I'm glad actually, Susan, that you ended at graduate students, because I just want to start there by saying when I came as a graduate student, there's a weird echo here, you weren't here. We didn't have the critical mass that we had later, and in fact it really was the graduate students who were forging, I loved your term, surreptitiously, but also in some ways a little more assertively, a place for feminist geography. And there was some resistance, there was mostly befuddlement, and a distinct lack of support. So when I came here, the real kind of hubs of activity and intellectual depth here at Clark Geography were Ann Buttimer and who we call the Buttimer boys, the phenomenologists. Maybe they don't know that we call them the Buttimer boys, and the Casperson-Cates kind of school, which then became CENTAD, and economic geography held down improbably both by Jerry Carrasca and Dick Peake, and none of them were open to feminist geography. I mean, I say maybe not hostile, just like kind of total indifference and befuddlement. And so it really was the graduate students who forged a path and kind of carried, at least made an opening for feminist geography. So if there are graduate students here, it's like, yes, you really can create great and important social change. Then, however, Susan came, and Susan said something about interviewing. I just want to say, sorry Susan, that Susan interviewed for the entire job on her back because she was having a terrible back problem. I remember sitting in the chair's office at Saul's office with those benches over it, and Susan is lying on her back. But obviously she was so brilliant that even lying on her back, I thought it was both weird but brave.
When I walked into the dean, who's it called? The dean of the college. I had to go see the dean of the college. I walked into his office and I said, the first thing I said is, I have to lie down. I did, I had to lie down, there was no one else to lie down. Well, when you have a back that doesn't function, you have to lie down.
So that was a spectacular opening.
He was, there's just been a sexual harassment case and he was lying down on the floor.
I read those were the days. Yeah, it was pretty wild, but we won. We got Susan, and then a critical mass started forming. So Joni and Diane Rochelow and Geraldine Pratt was here on a 1-year. I think you probably arranged it 1-year basis. Kirsten Johnson was here. We started to have a real critical mass, and I'd say that's one of my biggest lessons in terms of making any social change, certainly feminist change, is you need a feminist, as a critical mass. You can obviously start, an individual can change the world, 3 or 4 individuals and friends can change the world, but the critical mass is so important, and having those faculty here was absolutely essential to then kind of launching us and opening the space wide open to do feminist geography. And I think if you did, again, a network map of, do what Mona did a little bit with some of the journal articles. If you look at the feminist geography that's now being done in our discipline, and you all know, and we know that feminist geography is now one of the, really kind of robust, important, cutting-edge sub-disciplines. And I bet you'd find a very large share of that tracing back to Clark and through Clark Geography Network. So a really important center for opening up in the discipline as a whole. I actually want to flip to talk a little bit about some of the issues that I see now that feminist geography has become kind of established. It's like, oh yeah, everyone is feminist geography, of course. Some of the problems that I see ahead, right now one of the things that is the bee under my bonnet is that kind of, unfortunately, doing whatever you call it, gender studies, feminist studies, women's studies, has become so successful that it's also morphed into becoming a box-ticking exercise. And you all know what I mean. Putting in a grant, you have to say, oh, of course we're going to do gender studies, of course we're going to, that kind of box-ticking. And I was reading an article, I think not by a geographer, but one of the things that drives me nuts is I was reading this article. It's about drought and farmers in northern India, and the methodology opened up and said, oh, we interviewed whatever it was, 110 men and 118 women, so great. Hit that box, they tell you they interviewed both men and women, and then there was absolutely zero, empty of gender analysis in the entire rest of the article. It's like, well, what did those men and women think? Did they think different things that they have never experienced? Like, no, they ticked the box, they told us they interviewed both men and women, so that's great. And then there was no carry-through analysis. And unfortunately, I don't think this is particular to geography. I think it's, as feminist studies, gender studies has become more accepted and more normalized and more taken up and more part of the kind of infrastructure of applying for grants and all that kind of stuff, it has in many ways, I think interestingly kind of shrunk some space while at the same time obviously opening it. So I think that's our next collectively, our next frontier. It's like, okay, great that now everyone interviews women as well as men. How do we kind of expand kind of the analytical gaze so that we actually understand and can really integrate that kind of analysis into the work that's being done. And I think I'll stop at that point, because I'm running out of time, except I will just say that your nightmare stories, Susan, after Mona outed us this afternoon as being the Gorilla Girls. And we were actually going to do next, we were going to do a compilation of nightmare stories of graduate students, particularly women graduate students applying for jobs, including memorably. So this would be years after you were facing the same thing. One woman graduate student who said she was taken for interview dinner to a strip club. Not because it was a strip club, but because that's just where the guys went, and for dinner. So if you have a visitor, you take them to the strip club. So anyway, I think that's a good one. So I think you want to be part of our book. Anyway, thank you very much.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here. Good afternoon. Thanks very much, Brenda, for all your work organizing this, as well as Jim Murphy. Thanks especially to you, Deb, for organizing this particular session. So I came here in 1982, but before then I must have seen or read something about somebody called Susan Hanson at Clark University, and I knew she had also done some studies in urban geography, which is what I came for, along with somebody called Perry Hanson, studying gender, men, women, cities in Sweden. So that fascinated me. Amongst my first courses, of course, was one with Susan. It was a course on urban social geography. And the second course in that same semester was with Perry, learning about statistics. Neither of the two courses were laid back. No, she was healthy enough, she was not lying on her back, but I learned a lot in those introductory courses. The phrase that came to my mind was the women were always welcome at Clark. Janice Monk, her title for an article that Mona referred to. And indeed, my opening year, 1982, there were 4 of us who were women in that class, among whom were Michelle, where are you? And Obahosa, that's Michelle, I was there too, which at that time was unusual. But we also came at a time when we felt that there were enough women around not to feel that we were lonely, thanks to people like Joni, people like Mona, and many others before and after us. I have since depended on the contributions of somebody like Michelle as I went on, maybe her article on mentoring, and I have collaborated with Anne a number of times. I, back then, audited a class that you, Joni, had the opportunity to teach. I think it was called Women in the City.
Oh my gosh, I remember that.
I do remember. And that was something very unusual in grad school, but which was present at Clark University. Another thing that was unusual was that I was a TA in a course in social anthropology, I think it was called. So as a geography student, you could do some of your work in other departments. So whether it's learning from Barbara Thomas, who once invited me to her class as a student guest, in which the students were using a novel, a Nigerian novel called Joys of Motherhood, which I read and enjoyed, and the whole notion of having that kind of participatory teaching and learning, I since included in my own career, academic career. But I learned from Barbara, and needless to say, I kept in touch with the work of her and other people that she worked with afterwards, including Jodi, Diane, and so on. All this has served me well, especially if we think of what feminist geography is in terms of its comprehensive and inclusive perspective to understanding the world. I teach in a college that's 4 years, so it's undergraduates, and that's what I want to frame the remainder of my remarks around. So it's a public university, state college, and it's liberal arts curriculum. So I hardly have graduate students, but I think the background that I gained from gendered lens in geography at Clark has served hundreds, maybe thousands of undergraduate students to show them what we mean when we say human geography, feminist geography. I grew up in Nigeria. What is geography? Geography is the study of manners. So let's talk human. And this was all before even Susan's article on not excluding half the human came out in 1982. But I have used that all throughout these many decades in my work with students. Human geography is one thing, international development. This is the place where I met large numbers of students, male, female, of international persuasion. Name the country, endless, but also the African women. So in addition to the American and the African women, some of them in international development, some of them in other subjects, you just learned and sharpened your analytical skills. I certainly remember listening to lectures and bonding, not just in the mezzanine, but in some of your, potluck with people like Cynthia Enlow. And I still keep my ears open. I even attended a virtual session which she presented at Kent University during Zoom. In all my classes, I let the students know why a gendered lens matters. So whether I'm teaching about agriculture in Africa, livelihoods, what counts from the point of view of feminist geographers, I think the things that feminist geographers do can be shown to students, not in simplistic, but in very robust ways. So we have a lot of information. This is one of my own favorite examples about how many miles there could be in a village of pipe-borne water. But do we know how many miles a woman walks carrying buckets of water, or how many hours it takes? We know the number of cows, but how many hours does it take for the woman to milk? Those are all feminist kinds of, and then it leads you to your time geography. But not only the negativity or the tedious work, but the active contributions of women of color, African women across the globe, as agents of change, as in environmental sustainability, East African examples, South American examples, what have you. In social geography and intermediate class, from the early days, I used your atlas. So it's not just in graduate programs. So I used the atlas on gender. Subsequent to that, I used for the longest time the Thomas and Seager book. Yes, putting women in place, how feminist geographers make sense of the world. And though I stopped using that a few years ago, it's been replaced, yes, by the work of another Clark geography, feminist geographer, my dear friend Anne Oberhausen. So that's the book I currently use now, Feminist Spaces. Shout out to those people who may have reached out to me, even though I'm not in a graduate program. Dr. Johnson once asked me, could you please review Demonic Grounds by Catherine McKittrick. Jerry Pratt would help oversee some of the works we're doing. Another person might invite me, help us be the external examiner for this dissertation. And talking about dissertation, mine was the first all-female dissertation committee at Seager. So there was Seager, my advisor. Everybody knows I'm her baby, other than Eric and Christy. And then there was Jerry Pratt. And then my external examiner was Bridal Holcomb from Rutgers. Yeah. But they were all good mentors. They mentored me. Even before I finished my degree, had already published an article working with Susan. By the time I was doing my dissertation, strategically moving, those things that you use to empower female scholars. So I got an award for Geographic Perspectives on Women. Dissertation proposal was called GPAO. It also instills on you how you should be serving and mentoring others. So years after I served on the board for graduate students, judging graduate students' paperwork for the AAG. I remember I had 7 chapters in my dissertation, but I said I had a chapter 8 in my stomach. So I was pregnant with my baby. I lived with Susan and Perry. They took care of me. I appreciate all the caring and comfort and support that continued at that time, but also from the generations thereafter I graduated. Whether it's you, Melissa, or many other people, including Lydia today, they said to me, hurry. You know what that made me remember? When I sent an article to Susan, and she wrote back, hurry, submit. So I titled that paper, the name of the file, Hurry, and it motivated me to submit it. It became one of the well-cited papers. But it's also a paper that moved beyond that original research on gender and the journey to work, to incorporating race, ethnicity, immigrant status, the kinds of things which statistically we're already showing in the empirical work as what you could call, well, it would be like interaction effects in statistics, but in real terms, it also shows the intersectionality, which we all know feminist geography has moved along to. So, finally, for lifelong lessons that I have learned from all the people, or all the things that, all the content, all the people I interacted with at Clark, it's that care labor. I remember in one of those early conferences you would go, whether it's the Middle States or the AAGs, Susan pointed out that the work of hospitality and hotel care is usually done by women of color. We should remember to give them their due recognition. So it's a habit that's with me. And just, I mean, in the past day or two while we were at the AC, I met a woman, she's from Jamaica, and made sure I had her gratuity for her. Other lifelong lessons. I continue to collaborate with other people and try to uplift and try to learn. So right now I'm working with others in the area of sociology, who are women of color practicing sisterhood. And I've been invited in another collaboration to work, extending the work that I had done on Journey to Work to a book. It's a handbook on gender and mobility that's been done by Sarah McLafferty and Valerie Preston. At the end of the day, I just want to say that the legacy of feminist geography for me at Clark Graduate School of Geography is one that has been and continues to be, that one is well poised to understand the world and better enrich the world from a social justice perspective if we include a feminist geography lens. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. So, yes, thank you to Brenda and to Deb and to everybody at Clark for inviting us all back. It's really been amazing. I haven't been here in a really long time, and it was really weird walking into the mezzanine, and it looks exactly the same. It's like, I'm not really sure. I was like, did they put some, okay, anyway. But I actually did my undergraduate at Clark. I started at Clark in 1982, and Mona's talk really sort of set the stage. I came to Clark because I had never heard of it before, and but we were like doing the Massachusetts, anyway, and I was like, these people are really kind of interesting, because Clark at that time, it was very interesting, and I was like, okay, you could design your own maid, you could do all kinds of stuff, and you know, we're not peas in a pod, or what's things like, oh, we are peas in a pod, or whatever it was. Anyway, I don't remember what the opinion. The point is, I came here to be a political science major. And so, literally, the first class I took was Cynthia Enlow, who just blew my mind, and I became a Cynthia follower around after, and you know, I did things like I think it was like a center for gender studies for students that we did, or it was called the Women's Center at that time, I'm sure. I'll never forget this. You guys probably don't know this one. We got rid of porn night on campus. There was porn night at Temple. Like I mean at not at Temple, at Clark. Yeah, which I know from like a new feminist perspective might have been a good, it was really not a good thing. Yeah, we did things like that. It was anti-apartheid movement, and I worked with lots of other undergraduates and graduates from, students from geography, and Clark was one of the first to divest. So there was like all this stuff going on. And I was in political science and doing all the political science, and someone said to me, oh, you know, there's this guy, Martin Bowden. You gotta try a class with him. So I was like, okay. I never understood why the first row was empty. Okay, it was because he was so excitable he would spit. I'm kidding. And he was brilliant. And anyway, this is how I found geography. And you know, I have to say some of the geography professors were not particularly interested in gender and feminist stuff. I won't name names.
Oh, please.
I will not name names. But I went to England for a year at the LSE, did more geography there, came back here and met Susan and Ibipo. So I found them, and I was talking to these guys about what I was going to do. I ended up getting I believe it's the first Fulbright in feminist geography, and I was told to go to London, and I was told that that the reason they chose me, it was so weird. There was a woman on the committee who was like, we have to give this person, you know, like the Fulbright. Whoever heard of feminist geography? So I benefited from that. And then I came back and I was like trying to decide what to do. And Cynthia said to me, most political scientists are not like me. She's like, you know, you can't do a degree in political. She was like, that's not going to be a good fit. And I was like, okay, well, anyway, I came back here for geography, which was a fabulous fit. And I have to say, it was like a bubble. So women were in charge. Susan was the chair. She wasn't the chair when I first got here, but she was the chair. She was president of the AAG. She was editor of the Annals. And she would still get my drafts back to me faster than within 24 hours, which I still don't know how you did. And I had this, there were these amazing group of graduate students. And really, and also Joni was here, and Diane was here, and amazing group of graduate students, because I feel like that's home, right? And, you know, even though everybody was often doing different things. I remember Kevin St. Martin saying, you gotta come to this Rethinking Marxist, you know, oh, Julie, you know, you gotta go up here. And I was like, anti-essentialism, okay. And then, you know, and Mariana was here, and Lydia as well, who was very interested in unions. There was a lot of sort of intersectionality happening, maybe not using that language, people who were looking at gender and class and gender and racism and all these different kinds of things. And it didn't matter what you were doing. I learned a lot from political ecologists. You know, Paul Robbins was here, and Brad Yokish, and we would be at Moyni's all the time. I think I've probably spent 10 years in Moyni's. I was in Moyni's from the time I was 18, and you could drink at 18 and 19. Anyway, so this was it, and I wanted to say that there are a few things. First of all, the Clark feminist, and I mean that very broadly, connection is it's across time and space, right? Like when I went to England the first time, Sophie Bowlby, right? It was like, hey, I heard you were here. Or, you know, Mona and Ann Oberhauser and Michelle Masucci. I went down, my first job was at Georgia State University. You did not prepare us. Did not prepare us, and Michelle was at Auburn University, and I was like, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, and Anne was at West Virginia at that time, and we were all at CDAG, and it was very, very difficult, and then I ended up, I do want to say also that my research was totally formed during the Worcester expedition. Yeah. I was one of those grad students. I had to do the interviews, and I was like, there's all this really interesting information. You know, they want us to answer these questions, but there's all this stuff they're telling us, which is I can't put on this, you know, and that's how I got into my work, and I was working from your work. And I've done lots of different work since. When I went to Temple, I got it was interesting, because of the earlier one, where, you know, I had the research that was showing in 1996 during, you know, welfare reform, that, you know, the working poor and the unemployed poor women were the same women, and I wanted to be able to contribute to that debate, but, you know, the policymakers really don't want you there if you're not going to say what they want you to say, which is a big problem that I was thinking about in the talks earlier. And I got really fed up with it. I went to town hall. I was like, I'm just going to work with this. I'm just going to do some activist work, because clearly my research isn't going to do anything. And I went and I started working with the Kensington Welfare Rights Union, which is an organization in Philadelphia. And then they started this human rights campaign, and they needed a way to organize it. They needed a way to sort of figure it out. So I said, well, okay, I'll ask my colleague, Michelle Masucci, whose research was on sort of using low resource information technologies in organizing an environmental context, and then we started working together. That was amazing. That's only part of the story, and I've been working with Clarkies from different generations on all kinds of issues, and I really do think that one of the questions was like, what's going forward with feminist geography, and I think feminist geography is going forward, you know, as Black geographies, as you know, as like biosocial frameworks for looking at health. There's tons of ways in which feminist geography is sort of going forward in different ways. But I think there's a couple of things. I just want to say things. Clark is about institution building. One of the things you learn at Clark is to institution build, and particularly around geography. Okay, which is probably why there are so many chairs and deans and vice chancellors for research, and you know, it's kind of, you're sort of taught that. And the other thing is just sort of this interdisciplinarity and the you know, the ability to work with somebody who does not do any, you know, you have no idea what their work is, and to be able to be okay with saying like, I have no idea, I don't understand what you're talking about, like tell me, as opposed to being like, ooh, I feel silly saying I don't know this. It's all about like, you know, really being able to engage with other people. And I know that along with my colleague Michelle Masucci, who's Temple, I know that Lydia Savage, who's almost the president of the entire union of faculty professionals in the state of Maine. These are all the ways in which we build institutions and contribute. And we need to be working to change the institute, as feminist geographers have been saying, you know, from within. But Ibipo and I were on we were trying to remember, it was a couple of years ago now, and there was a call for people to come, I think it was either from the Feminist Geography Specialty Group or Black Geographies, or maybe both, and I just can't remember, because of the way critical race theory was, you know, being treated, and that way it was really K through 12. And now, of course, it's moved into the university arena, and there were a number of feminist geographers, African American, you know, scholars of color, Global South, these kinds of things, and their stories were heartbreaking. Of how they were the ones in one department in places that were not going to be. It's the same kind of thing. You come out of these programs and then you go into the place and it's nothing like that. And it was really upsetting to me that was still very much the experience. And I think we need to figure out how to get back to, like, it's this crazy moment with what's going on, you know, critical race theory and, you know, trans rights and you know, abortion rights and all this kind of stuff. And I think we've got to get back to like engaging with, we've always engaged with communities in the places that we've lived. That's part of the whole feminist ethic. But like, I think we have to start engaging with some of these things. It's crazy. It's really crazy. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
And I'm really excited to be on this very esteemed panel. I feel like the baby, not in age, but just in stature. And thanks again to Brenda for organizing all this, and for Deborah for inviting me. So, yeah, but like everyone else, and as Mona pointed out in her talk, in one way Clark doesn't prepare you for the world, because it's like there are all these kick-ass women here. And so you're just like, well, that is how the world works, right? Like women are just like better and stronger, and you know, like whatever. And then you go in the real world, and I had even, you know, in the early 2000s had the experience at job interviews of being asked if I was married, if I had children, if I were planning to have children. When I was at my institution, there was, when I was up for, around the time I was up for tenure, there were a number of lawsuits going. So one year, all the people denied tenure were women. One year, all the people denied tenure were people of color. And I was 7 months pregnant with twins when I went up for tenure. So around that time, I went around, you know, telling everyone, "Have you seen my lawsuit? Have you seen my lawsuit?" You know, just in case. But anyway, so I got tenure, and I get to be the person to again try to institutionalize some measure of feminist geography in a very small geography program. You know, to be the person to be like, there are no women on this list when you're putting together the short list for a hire. And people are like, yeah, and I'm like, there are no women on this list. Ergo, this list is not going forward. You know, so the ways that we still need, even now, that we still need to institutionalize this work. And in my research, I often say that one of the nicest things that people say about my research, you know, have told me about stuff that I've done, is, oh, I've never thought about it that way before, right? And so for any academic, you're like, haha, look at me creating. But honestly, when it comes to a lot of feminist work, and so I wrote a book called Gender and Gentrification, which in many ways was not groundbreaking. Other than that, there is no other book called Gender and Gentrification. But it was, you know, for feminist geographers, it was very much like, yeah, of course. But for the rest of the world, it was like, you know, like housing markets are gendered, you know, like commuting patterns are gendered, you know, activism is gendered, you know, and so just the ways in which, as Sarah Ahmed says, we have to keep saying it because they keep doing it. You know, that like the ways in which, you know, things are better. There are certain ways in which things are better, but there are other ways in which things are heartbreakingly the same. And actually, I was just teaching in my upper-level urban planning class this week. I love Dolores Hayden's book, Redesigning the American Dream. And in like rereading it for like the 900th time, prepping for class, I'm like, you can still say that, 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 right? You know, there's a lot of work left to be done. And so then something that I think is very important about feminist geography writ large, and then especially at Clark, since it's such a powerhouse in it, is that the hunger for it and the need for it is still there. And so one of the other, probably the most cited thing I've ever participated in writing is an article called For Slow Scholarship, which I wrote as part of the Great Lakes Feminist Geography Collective with Trina Hamilton, another Clarkie, and also Trina and I wrote Just Green Enough together. So there were 11 of us that wrote that article, and we all say that it was the most kind of like generative, sustaining writing experience of our lives, because because it was both, you know, no one person has to do the work because there are 11, but also it was kind of like a writing therapy session too. And I think the fact that it is probably the most cited thing that I've been involved in just shows the hunger for it, right? That people are having all these experiences that are not as different as they should be from Susan's experiences when she started, and mine when I started, that we are still looking for like community and care, and that universities are becoming less and less places that do that in our neoliberal moment, and so we basically have to keep fighting the same fight over and over again, and it's exhausting. It can be draining, but that's exactly what they want. They want you to be tired, and they want you to want to give up, and that's why we can't. And so that we have to keep going. And so it often requires being kind of like the loud person in the room, the person who's like, oh God, there she goes again, But someone has to say it, because if you don't, then it's shocking how many people are not going to be aware of oh, hey, childcare matters, women or women with care responsibilities, and of course anyone, in fact, with care responsibilities can't do this thing if you schedule it at this time, and just really kind of a lot of practical stuff that that again, that we are constantly kind of having to reinvent the wheel on this stuff, even as also I think we have gotten better at creating community about finding ways to make those connections and do those things. And again, this kind of political moment is really weird because just picking up what Melissa said about, especially women in the global south who may be the one person in their department, and I have like a mentoring relationship with someone through the community geography specialty group of AAG, who's in India, and tells me that like, just these like horror stories of being the only woman in the room and people being actively hostile, not just to feminist geography, but also to any kind of community work and engaged work. And I'm trying to like sympathize, but also like, yeah, like, even when it's bad here, it's not that bad. But then at the same time, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I got an email from India being like, "Who, dude? Like, sorry, like we're really feeling for you here in India." And but it is this global struggle, and it's not linear. And we're not just always going in a positive direction, right? There's still a lot of work to do. So as much as Clark Geography has helped to create the basis for that work, we still have to keep going. We're not done yet. So I think I'll just leave it.
Thank you so much, all of you. Appreciate all of your thoughts and comments. So we have a nice amount of time still, about 20 minutes for comments, questions. Wait for me to bring the microphone to you so that it gets in the recording.
Thank you for your presentations and your memories. I was predated all of you, but I have to say that one of the things that I think is really important is the way that feminist geography and what I took from my experience at Clark was the way we do research and who we do it with and who we write with. And I think from my experience in my career, collaborative research and collaborative writing was really a vehicle, an incredible vehicle for learning and for spreading information and so forth. And I have to say that the actual community-based work that I was involved with, much of which was in New England, some of which was in New England, some of which was historical with Martha Acklesberg. I also did a lot of writing across disciplines, so I wrote with women who are in other disciplines as well. But I guess the lesson I learned from the work, the historical work, which was with Martha on the precursors of women who were involved in the Spanish anarchist movement during the Spanish Civil War and dramatically transformed the landscape and environment and life in Spain, was the degree to which women became involved actively in social change in the venues and in the movements that we were studying, and how the traversing of the environment was a learning experience, was a growing and learning experience for women that actually radicalized them. And the one piece that we did together, Martha and I, was about women launching a huge strike in Barcelona sometime in the 1930s, I think, which was really the culmination of a bread riot. And since they were the ones who were most affected by the absence of bread and long lines, food lines, and so forth like that, they decided to march through the city. And it was in their marching through the city that they became even further radicalized. They actually began to see the way in which the built environment was impacting their lives, how the lack of particular resources was impacting their lives, and so forth. And the other, there are many different instances of research that I've done that have been sort of eye-opening in that way. But one more, just that I'll mention, is I got asked by a a feminist architecture firm in Providence, Rhode Island, to do a post-occupancy study of developments that they had done of affordable housing in factories in Providence for single parent households. So they were led by women, and what they wanted to do was to learn about how the interiors of these buildings that they had renovated was had impacted their lives positively. And so they, sort of led me in the direction of certain questions about space. How are you using this apartment that's been renovated for you? And yet, when I got talking to them, it was very easy to understand that the actual design of their units was not what was improving their lives or not improving their lives in this situation. They thought in terms of the much larger environment, and they started to talk about the neighborhood, and they started to talk about transportation, and they started to talk about, how their kids could get one place or another, and totally broadened the conversation, which wasn't necessarily to the liking of the architects who wanted more specific information about how they were using their dining rooms, and so forth. But, I really, I think that a lot of the community-based work that a number of feminist scholars do and have done is really eye-opening, and it really changes the nature of the understanding and the questions that you ask as you go along, and the involvement of women in social change themselves within the places in which they live. And I really resonated in particular with things that you said, Melissa, about that. And I think it all stems from Clark, from geography of Clark, and how we sort of, I don't know, we were trained to ask the more difficult questions and to listen, to what people say. And I just want to end with one thing. When these women that I interviewed in Providence, I started to ask them, and this is where the surreptitiousness comes in. I started to ask them questions that weren't on my list of questions and given to me by the architects. And one of them was, can you describe for me this sort of ideal living situation, or your ideal of a house or home that you'd like to live in? And they described a very typical suburban house. They were living in downtown Providence with grass, and it had to be 2 stories. And you had to own it so that you had control over the space. And it had a white picket fence around it, and it just sort of blew me away. And then the final thing that was said was, and you have to be good to live there. Whoa. And I mean, it just showed you the way social class and gender and mythologies around what and how people get to where they are. And I just, I think you have to ask questions that aren't on your original list when you're doing research. Thank you very much.
I'm going to take minor moderator's privilege just to comment that one of the articles out of my dissertation, which was about neighborhood activism, was about gendered discourses in neighborhood activism. And I used Myrna's work, and I had no idea she was a Clarkie until this weekend. So anyway, to talk about the networks and the connections of all the intellectual legacies. Other questions? Yes.
So I'm Lydia Savage, and I did my dissertation with Susan and finished in '96. And one of the things that I think is really important about the Clark graduate student community and the mezzanine and Moynihan's and all of that, and the couches are much nicer. I went and sat on them. Anyway, is when I arrived in 1991, a large part of why I came, even though I had larger fellowship offers at other places, was the equal funding that students got. And I don't know when that started, but I think...
And we fought the math on that. Okay.
Well,
Carry on.
Let me, because I'd love to know. So I think it draws a certain student, right? You can get more money for a shorter time somewhere else or even longer, but your fellow graduate students may not have that opportunity. And so I think there is a choice to be made there. I was offered more money at UBC, and I came to Clark for, at the time, wait for it, $8,900 a year, right? And we didn't have health insurance, so congratulations on your union. I was very excited that Clark recognized it right away instead of an election. That was good on them. I am president of my faculty union. Anyway, I think that, and it was guaranteed at the time for 3 years. And I think what that does is it opens up a conversation, because I remember Mariana Pavlovskaya handing me her orals reading list without question, proposals passed around, grant applications passed around. There was no competition. And it also really equalized the field for women. You didn't have to be nice to get a TA, right? You didn't have to take the notes, right? Because you were the junior graduate student, right? I mean, there was just an equality among the students that made, I think, a community of listening and questioning and cooperation famous. And I want to hear how you had to fight for it. We had to fight to keep it because we were told that it made us lazy, right? If you really wanted to be famous, you can imagine who said that. You would chase the big money, right? And then everyone would just compete. And there's power that comes with having that funding. You can piss somebody off and still have funding the next semester, right? And so some faculty did not appreciate that, and others thought it was great. So I think that's a really important part of Clark that I know Melissa at Temple has instituted with her graduate students. So it's part of institute building that when we have funding that we can think about doing, and it's like, no women on this list, it's not going forward, right? Those are things that we can do.
Okay, 2 things, Joni. We want to hear the answer about how that happened. We have another question, and just for the record, Clark did ask for an election.
It was 79, 80, and 81,
They said to be a long time.
and we were told that there couldn't be equal funding, economic reasons, blah, blah. We need to expand the number of graduate students, and CUGS, Clark University Geography Graduate Students Union was, or group, I don't think, maybe called themselves was very sturdy about no, equal funding, and if that means fewer graduate students, that means fewer graduate students, because we foresaw and were experiencing exactly what you have enumerated for us, that having competitive funding, or you get some money and you get more money, or you get less money, creates this toxic competitive environment. And so it wasn't, I shouldn't say it wasn't like fiercely resisted, but it was definitely resisted. And then it was in place, and then it was like, okay, we'll relax. But it kept coming up again. It's like whack-a-mole, it kept coming up again. It's like a couple of years later, and then
I remember writing to you and Mona.
Yeah.
Saying, now you have to write again.
yeah,
The same
yeah,
letter.
exactly. So anyway, so just to say that it was a battle, but we had principles on our side. I mean, it was, you couldn't argue. I mean, you could argue the economics, you could argue this. I suppose you could make an argument about if you want to be famous or whatever. But everyone could see the rightness of the principle. And so even if you were fighting against it, you were fighting from a very stupid point of view. So anyway.
We have another question.
Right.
My question is for Joni. My name's Nick. So I'm wondering, can you speak to how feminist geographies on campuses are different at a business university compared to at a liberal arts university? And I'm also wondering, how do you see feminist geographers or feminist geographies impacting well-being on university campuses?
Thanks for that question, Nick. The last question, I think other people are probably better suited to answer. But the reason, in case you don't know, Bentley University, the university where I now teach, is a business university, which is a weird thing in the US, that there are these undergraduate business universities. Bentley and like 4 others in the US. So anyway, I can start by saying that Bentley has no, whatever you want to call it, gender studies, women's studies, intersectional studies, no department no program. There is one woman who was for many, many, many years an adjunct and just now has been shifted to tenure track, who was the only one who was like really holding down the programming. So that's a good place to start. It's like it doesn't exist. It isn't. Now I shouldn't say it doesn't exist because individual faculty, individual students, there are other student groups who are engaged with social justice and gender and feminist issues, but it doesn't have an institutional place. And I think that my experience at Bentley is, of course, like any university, there are wonderful people there. There are really like crazy and stupid people there, but you know, it's kind of the same mix as anywhere. But the notion of integrating feminist perspectives into like the institution as a whole and infusing it is still, you know, I don't know what year we're in, 1960s. So I mean, you know, individuals great, but kind of structure, it's not there. So, you know, I teach a couple of courses on gender, this, that, and that, and other people do, but it's very hodgepodge. So it doesn't have an institutional basis. Do you know Bentley? Have you been there?
I have.
Are you from Bentley?
No.
No? Just wanted to know who I am. I'm sorry. But what was your experience? Just briefly.
Oh, wait, microphone. Doesn't get picked up.
So I work as a planner at an architecture firm,
Oh, cool.
and we are working with Bentley to try to enhance their student well-being.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that we've encountered is an issue with women not having spaces where they feel like they can prosper. And unlike liberal arts universities, where liberal arts schools, where there are more women than men usually today. Business universities aren't like that, so I was just curious what your opinions were, since you're a Clark and
Bentley's the
work for
flip
Bentley.
of most other universities, which are now 60 or even 70% women. Bentley is 60% men. And
Exactly.
So it's a very different. Thank you.
Thank
for
you.
that. Make those spaces.
Okay, there's a question over there. I know there was one back over here, but I saw that hand first, sorry. It's hard to keep track of who asked first.
Thank you for the panel. It makes me more proud to be an alumnus of this great institution. Two quick questions. One is, at lunch, Mona showed some data on women at Clark geography. It was stunning. I mean, just unbelievable. So I guess my question is why? Because that data is earlier than the radical geography period. The second piece is about radical geography, and I'm sorry I came in a little late, so I might have missed that at the beginning, but the big gap in that brochure is, I don't know how you celebrate 100 years of Clark without having a session on radical geography. I find that quite remarkable. So my question is the relationship between radical geography at Clark and feminist geography at Clark, and how the two intersected and how they fed off of each other. Thank you.
Who wants to start?
Myrna chuckled. I just wanted to those here in the back there. Myrna kind of chuckled at that. Go ahead.
Well, the radical geography that was at Clark when I came was very strongly Marxist, and there was no place for a feminist viewpoint that would mesh with Marxism. So that was it. Period.
I will just point out that many of the feminist geographers who came from Clark were here as radical geographers and then sort of later went on to do feminist work. So, right, Julie, Graham and Kathy Gibson are very good examples. Yeah, I know, Danny, what you're saying, but I think this is the radical geography at Clark, and I get what you're saying about, you know, I get what you're saying, but I also think this is the radical geography at Clark, and I think this includes a lot of people who are also Marxists and apparently anarchists and anti-racists and anti-essentialists, and you know, that's what I think.
So I think we're at time. I wanted to say, I think Mona gave us an answer in her talk, which had to do with the connections between the geography department and education. And in the first 50 years of the GSG, education was also a field that women could go into, and so there was a synergy there, I think. I don't believe we have time for another question. I apologize. I think that I have to call it to a close. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to our panelists.